Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we have another competitive tournament list review, this time covering a very interesting list that includes the Skathach Wraithknight. And this was one of those units that I thought could have some viability in competitive play going forward after the balanced data slate. Although, I have to be real with you guys, I really didn't think it was going to win a competitive GT. And it was really awesome to see this model perform well in competitive play because it is one of my favorite Wraithknight variants. And what's really exciting is how much variation there is in these new competitive lists that are evolving post-balanced data slate. And it looks like the Eldar are still doing pretty good. The Eldar still have some teeth in competitive play, which, a couple people here and there were saying, that they were basically a dead faction competitively after the nerf. And as proven by a couple of the GT wins that we've seen, is just quite frankly not the case. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the video itself and what we're going to be looking at in it. So we're going to be taking a look at the tournament itself. We're going to be doing a review and analysis of the winning list, which is, of course, an Aeldari one. And we are going to be asking the question, are super heavies like the Wraithknight making a comeback in competitive play? So the tournament winning list took place at an event called Geekfest in Shearwater, Canada on February 24th to 25th. There were 40 players in attendance, so there were a little less players than, a bigger GT. It was a smaller GT in general, but 40 players is still quite a bit of competition. And Jonathan Betteridge took the win with his Aeldari. But his list was a little bit different and unique because it included the Skathach Wraithknight. So this was his list at a glance. He had the Autarch Wayleaper as standard. He also had an Avatar of Cain, a Death Jester, a Farseer, Fuegan, of course, the Skathach Wraithknight, which was absolutely the MVP of this list, Rangers, 2 units of Shroud Runners, 2 units of support weapons, 2 units of Swooping Hawks, and of course, Warp Spiders. All right, so like I always do in these videos, I am going to go ahead and do a deep dive into the list itself, look at all of its components, and analyze the list structurally as well as its strengths and synergies. This was, of course, post-January data slate at 2,000 points. For the characters in this list, we start off with the standard Autarch Wayleaper. This one is a little bit different, though, because it has a Phoenix gem, and I think this is a recurring theme of the list. The list is surprisingly tough for an Eldar list, and of course, having the Phoenix gem on an Autarch Wayleaper means the Wayleaper can get mixed up in hairy situations more frequently. And in general, can just get more involved in the battle itself. There is also, of course, the notorious Avatar of Cain, and we all know how strong the Avatar is. Great overwatch and denial potential with Fate dice, is extremely tough and does a lot of damage to a lot of different targets. This thing can run into a monolith and has a decent chance of one-shotting it in a single round of combat if you roll well enough. Considering your opponent is a little bit unlucky with the invul saves, that is. But the Avatar is also a great primary objective holder, and even though the OC is a little bit on the lower side, its ability to survive on an objective with support is one of the best that the Index has to offer. For, of course, the lowest price. The next lowest being the Wraith Blades at 390 for 10. Well, actually 340 points, because unlike the Wraith Guard, they didn't get nerfed. So they're still at 340, which actually just puts them a little bit more expensive than the Avatar of Cain, and you probably do want to also run a Spirit Seer with them, so they are a little bit more expensive than the Avatar for holding objectives. And of course, just don't do nearly as much damage against hard targets. The list also has a Death Jester in it, and the Death Jester is an amazing anti-character unit, but is also very good at taking out Marines and mech targets. So anything with 2 wounds and a 3+ armor save, the Death Jester is going to make mincemeat out of. And in this particular list, because he has a lot of high-value units, like the Skathach Wraithknight and the Avatar, going after small units of 5 Marines isn't really going to be something they're going to want to waste their time with, so including a Death Jester who can do that very easily and efficiently is a good option to have. We also have a basic Farseer on foot, I assume to be able to provide fortune to the Skathach Wraithknight or the Avatar in the early stages of the game when your opponent has their full firepower to bear. Makes it a little bit easier for those models to survive. We also have Fuegan. Now, Fuegan's a great character and basically has become an auto-include and a staple in a lot of competitive lists. I'm actually surprised he didn't get nerfed in the balanced data slate, as he was a big staple before. But what makes him so good is his immense anti-large damage combined with his very good ability to revive himself on a 2-up. He basically is a Phoenix gem. On top of that, his melee isn't bad. Has damage 3 melee, which is very effective against Terminator equivalent enemies. As far as the other datasheets, we're going to start off with 5 Rangers, and just like my recent video on Rangers, we have these guys to basically deny enemy infiltrators and scouts. This army really needs to be able to get up the board and get better positions on enemy units, so Rangers and things like Shroud Runners, which the army also has, are going to be vital to controlling the board in the early stages of the game. And also, Rangers are just a really good disruption unit that can take advantage of positional mistakes your opponent makes early on in the game as well, which can cinch an easy victory for you, especially when used in combination with the Avatar of Khaine and Skathach Wraithknight to set up potentially deadly setups. So, something that you might think about is charging Rangers into an enemy vehicle early on to tie it up in combat and make it harder for that enemy vehicle to actually target your Avatar and Skathach Wraithknight effectively. As for the meat and potatoes of the list, we have the Skathach Wraithknight, and it is equipped with 2 Inferno Lances. Now, personally, I like the Death Shroud cannons, but the Inferno Lances are extremely powerful and no doubt pack a serious punch against large targets. And of course, a lot of the most dangerous opponents in competitive play right now are Necrons and Custodes, and the Inferno Lances are indeed better against both of those armies than the Death Shroud cannons are, because you have the Melt rule and you have an insane number of attacks on those Inferno Lances, so they can go after heavy Terminator equivalent enemies like Custodes or even Monoliths and Satan Shards. And yes, even though Satan Shards are very tanky, the Melt to 2 special rule that is on the Inferno Lances will guarantee that some damage will get pushed through, and that, in combination with the other elements of this list, can make quick work of a Satan Shard every single turn. And of course, the other elements of that list being both the Avatar of Khaine and the support weapons. We have 2 D cannons in this list. Devastating Wounds is very effective against invul saves, and even though you do have Feel No Pain and half damage with the Satan Shards, with Fate Dice assistance, you can, in fact, finish off Satan Shards fairly easily with a couple of D cannons. But of course, D cannons are great into other targets, especially targets without invul saves, just with very high armor because of the high AP value of the D cannon, the high strength of the D cannon. And, in general, I think Eldar lists are going to have to rely on some form of indirect fire, and currently, the D cannon and, of course, the Dark Reapers seem to be the best options for that. Dark Reapers being good against very light infantry, and D cannons being good against heavy targets. We do also have 2 units of Shroud Runners in this list to pass out lethal hits and also just act as objective units. So Shroud Runners are very tough for the cost. They're much tougher than things like Aspect Warriors. They have 3 wounds apiece, so you have 9 wounds for the whole unit. They have stealth. They have a 4+ save and, basically a 5+ invul save against shooting, which isn't bad. So even though normally we wouldn't think of Shroud Runners as a durable unit, they do have quite a bit more durability than our other secondary scoring options like Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders. They do also have some pretty solid anti-infantry shooting with their scatter lasers and, of course, are a damage multiplier, being able to grant other units in your army lethal hits against a acquired target. Swooping Hawks, of course, also take a position in this list. Like most Eldari armies, are going to have at least 1 or 2 of these units, if not more, simply because of the fact that Swooping Hawks are so good at scoring secondary objectives, and that is desperately needed in every single list. And at the low cost of 75 points, you can use these guys to do decent ship damage due to the lethal hits on their weaponry. And of course, closing out the list, you have a unit of warp spiders. I think most armies are going to include at least one unit of warp spiders for the immense speed that they have, but also because of that overwatch. It's very useful at screening out things like lone operatives and other squishy targets that are going to be hard to hit, right? Because that overwatch does auto hit. You are going to get an average of 3 devastating wounds with it among the other normal wounds that you roll. So even though warp spiders did get hit pretty hard with that phantasm nerf, of course, you know, in my honest opinion, phantasm was probably best used on a unit like warp spiders. They are still very strong. Okay, so what are my final thoughts on the list? So I think this list is absolutely wild, and it's something that I really have never thought about doing, right? And I know at the beginning of the edition, there was a lot of these types of lists with double Wraith Knights and things like that, but they operated in such a different way than this list does. It has an extremely strong presence on primaries and secondary objectives alike, and has very high mobility to boot, so you can pretty much be anywhere on the board that you want to in any given turn. However, it doesn't sacrifice damage for that extra mobility. It has a lot of high-powered anti-large damage, and you're basically able to pick what you want to each and every turn and destroy it systematically. And on top of it all, it has a lot of synergy baked in and is very durable. So you have units that just won't die, right? Things like the Skathach Wraithknight under the effects of Fortune. You have things like the Avatar of Cain, which of course can also benefit from Fortune and is extremely tough. And I really do think this list just pretty much hits all those check marks, right? If you look at competitive play, it hits the primary check mark. It controls primaries very well. It can do very well on secondary objectives. It has a lot of focused damage. It's able to reposition itself very quickly, and it's able to control the board from the beginning of the game and onwards. So overall, a very interesting list, and of course extremely powerful. The Skathach Wraithknight being something that I never considered personally for super competitive play, but a choice that does make a lot of sense with all of the meta armies right now being extremely tough and very mobile. Things like Custodes. And by the way, guys, Custodes are not a slow army by any means. They're actually much faster than you would think. They have a lot of different abilities that allow them to do this in competitive play. Necrons are also very quick because, you know, whether you're talking about the Hypercrypt Legion or you're talking about the Canoptic Court, they both utilize models and abilities that can move and transverse the board very fast. So you do need something to quickly respond, and the Skathach Wraithknight being able to skyleap once a game does kind of solve that problem. In addition to it being able to hit hard against Terminator equivalent enemies like Custodes and tough targets like Monoliths and other Necron large targets. And honestly, it's just cool, right? I mean, having a Skathach Wraithknight in your list is epic, and I'm glad to finally see a list like this where you have a unit that's not typically considered to be super competitive, used in a very clever way to adapt to the current meta and situation that we find ourselves in. So does this mean that super heavies like the Wraithknight are making a comeback in competitive play? Well, I do really think it depends on which ones you're talking about, but the Skathach Wraithknight in particular is really strong, especially the way that Jonathan used it in this particular list. Having the ability to skyleap once a game is really strong, and having OC10 on objectives cannot be underestimated, especially with the large base that the Wraithknight has. So a lot of units are simply just not able to get on the objective unless you destroy the Wraithknight, right? Because of the large base, it takes up most of that space. And therefore, a lot of times, you're just not going to be able to shove enough models on there to be able to contest. You need something with really small bases, and of course, you need something with high OC, like, you know, Imperial Guard infantry and stuff like that. And even then, that's assuming that those guardsmen last long enough between the hail of fire from things like Swooping Hawks, Shroud Runners, and Warp Spiders, right? So, you know, there's just a lot that I think goes into the planning of using the Skathach Wraithknight in this list, and I think it worked out really well for Jonathan in this tournament. And of course, having powerful ranged weapons that can hit hard targets very efficiently is super strong, especially on a very tough platform like the Wraithknight. So, in conclusion, congratulations to Jonathan Betteridge for taking home the gold, and glory for the Aeldari. It was awesome to see a Skathach Wraithknight win a competitive GT. And with such diverse and clever builds coming from the Eldar community, what will we see next? Maybe perhaps we'll even see some Dark Reapers performing really well in the competitive scene. And wink, wink, you guys, we actually have, and it's going to be the topic of my next tournament list review. And I'm telling you guys, Dark Reapers are better than you give them credit for, so maybe give them a shot in your games and you'll actually be pleasantly surprised. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last year. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to help support the channel, I have free trials activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon or some Eldar-inspired apparel on my channel store page, I will leave the links for those in the description also. And of course, one last thing, I do want to mention that I am working on a community painting project video, so if you have something that you're really proud of that's Eldar related, whether it be Dark Eldar, Harlequins, or just Craftworld Eldar, whatever it is, even conversions, if you're really proud of it, it's fully painted and based, take a photo of it and shoot it to my email address for the channel, and I'd love to put it in that community video. And I also did an announcement video on this, so if you want to check out the details for that, you can check out my channel page and look for the appropriate video under Eldar Community Painting Project. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.